Good evening, TDN listeners and viewers to this week in interview. Welcome to a special extended version of this week in interview. Today being the 9th, November the 9th, 2022. It's it's a special program, one because we're starting early. We have two items to deal with, very, very important items, and they both needed to be dealt with today. And so we made the decision to have both of them and just do 2 hours of this weekend interview. I'm hoping that all of you got the message that we were starting early. Um, Today at 7, we were starting 7 p.m. New York time. Because of daylight saving, it is 8 p.m. in Dominica. So welcome to you if you're listening from Dominica on RVR Jams, DigiPlay channel 59. You are the reason why we're doing this double take of this week in interview. If you are listening otherwise on Facebook, on This Week in Interviews Facebook page, or on TDN Radio Facebook page, welcome. Welcome to our viewers on YouTube. You can find us on TDN Network 1. You may be also looking at us on tdntv.net. So tdntv.net on YouTube is TDN Network 1. On Facebook, we are on This Week in Interview Facebook page, as well as TDN Radio Facebook page. And of course, by now, if you are Dominican or associated with Dominican, and almost I think everybody who is of Caribbean heritage know by now that the Prime Minister of Dominica has called a snap election, what they call a snap election. On June 6th at 8 p.m., November 6th at 8 p.m., Sunday, this Sunday gone, today being Wednesday, November 6th, he addressed the nation, and at that time he declared that he was going to call elections on November 6th. And everybody, I guess, were taken aback, shocked, because there are a number of issues associated with that. He made the announcement on Sunday night. On Monday morning, the parliament was dissolved, and that meant that I think you had all up till midnight on the very next day, if you were not registered, to get registered. The political parties had to get themselves together to contest if they chose to contest. The Electoral Commission has a lot of duties to perform between the time that a election is announced to election day. The president has to issue proclamations to that regard, and so it was very short. It's like it was allowing, I think, probably 29 days between the announcement of the election and the calling of the election. And so I wanted to dive into that because we have no choice. We don't even have the choice to go in 2 feet at a time. We have to dive right in and to really explore what that announcement means and what the possible implications of that announcement can be. What is the opposition forces response to it? And by opposition forces, I do not mean that the parliamentary opposition necessarily. I mean all of the forces who are dissatisfied with the way the current government is running the affairs of the country and would like to propose or would like to put forward an alternative government to manage the affairs of the country. So I'm grouping all of them and call them the opposition forces. So the political parties, the civic societies like Civic Vibes and NJAM, and what about the DAIC, the Council of Churches, every what you would call a stakeholder in Dominica, what were their response or what should be their response? We've heard some folks are saying that nobody should participate in the election, and that it should send a clear message that that elections are such a fundamental part of democracy, and therefore it should not be subjected to such shenanigans. So therefore, there should be no participation by anybody else in the election. In other words, a boycott of the election by the opposition forces. Other folks are saying if you do that, then that means you give the Labour Party a free doing into to form the next government, which is exactly what the leader wants. And folks are of the opinion that from evidence is that he would take it. He would be like the bully on the football field or the basketball team who would, if he could get every other team to default so that he could win the championship, would still hoist the championship and be proud of it as if he had fought hard to get it. They point to examples of how he's so proud to be called doctor without having a single day of the doctor program, and therefore still he would take the the opportunity to be the prime minister from the government for the next 5 years, whether it's contested or not. So there are a number of opinions and voices that have been heard throughout since the last couple of days, last few days of the announcement. By the way, because I think this is going to be a very impactful conversation, I'm going to give a character and all of ancillary things. We have a couple of videos. I see my fellow Dominican and colleague Alvin is waiting. But before I go to Alvin, I want to also mention that in addition to the announcement of the election by the Prime Minister, and we will touch on the destruction that was experienced in the northeast part of Dominica, Castle Sufria. As a matter of fact, while the Prime Minister was announcing the snap election, folks in those areas had to evacuate their homes so that they wouldn't get washed away by landslide flooding rivers. Some of them are still stranded without electricity, without clean water, without supplies from since Sunday. But in the meantime, all of these machinations by the government to ram through, to force through a snap election um, goes ahead unchecked. So, as I said, welcome again. You, my regular listeners, you always here. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. If tonight is the first time this, well, in 2 hours, in the second hour, we will be dealing with diabetes because on the 14th of November is World Diabetes Day. And I have two guests that were already lined up and prepared for that show, and I did not want to preempt them, no matter how important the election issue was. And so from 8 to 9, we will be talking diabetes and giving us some good information of how you can manage that's how you can prevent yourself from entering that frightening realm of being diabetic. All right, I'm always anxious to talk to my brother, Mr. Alvin Thomas. He's waiting patiently for that, and thank you for joining me on this forum, Alvin. Welcome back. It's been a little while, but you always welcome.
Yeah, yeah,
Always
not a very long while though. But it's amazing how time flies by so quickly.
welcome,
But
Alvin. Man, definitely I'm going to give you free reign, but I don't know what was your reaction on Sunday when the news came that while we were watching the destruction going on the east side of the country, folks cannot sleep in their homes. Folks almost getting washed away, their homes getting destroyed. In the midst of that, the Prime Minister of Dominica is announcing an election in 29 days. Like the sports people that say, what was going through your mind
well,
when you heard
well,
that?
well, like every Dominicans at home and abroad, when you hear the Prime Minister is about to address the nation, it's like when you hear the President of the United States is going to address the nation. Everybody is anxious and curious to figure out, well, what's going on, I mean, the president is going to address the United States, the prime minister is going to address the nation. And like everything else, everybody's curious and trying to figure out what it is. And of course, at the same time, we had this situation taking place in the eastern side of the country. And folks were speculating, well, maybe he's coming to tell you, maybe it's that bad, because like you, I'm sure we saw the videos circulating of the destruction that was taking place in Cassie Bruce and the various communities. But only to our dismay and surprise, we heard the Prime Minister talking about elections. And I saw a video with a young man. You know, in all of that, you still have to inject a little humor. And there was this video with this young man hitting his head saying, wake up, are you sleeping? It's like you're in a sleep and like you're dreaming of that. You're not hearing it. So you saying to yourself, wake up, am I dreaming? Is that my hearing it, or is it a dream?
Exactly.
So definitely, but when you've sobered down now and you take this thing in, you realize, but wait a while, what kind of leader do we have on our hands? I mean, what kind of person is that? One, where's the humanity? I mean, look what's happening, and at the same time, and if I recalled, he must have mentioned it just en passant, the situation up there, and that they will send heavy equipment or whatever. But the bulk of his address to the nation had to do with, one, he wants a new Labour Party. Two, he wants to bring in new people, and talking about post-COVID and, you know, and his politics. So I was disturbed at a certain time. I was kind of angry as well. Angry to the sense that, you know, what can we do as a people to change that? But guess what, Tony? The next day, Monday, when I happened to get a copy of a letter from Sir Byron to the leader of the opposition, giving certain timelines in terms of the work that he supposed to have been doing, I mean, this thing even threw the thing out further off the park. Because if I'm sure you saw the letter yourself, and you must have read it, the last paragraph of this letter has the exact timelines. And the first timeline in the letter, which I'm sure he would have gotten before the leader of the opposition in terms of the work from Sir Byron, I will present phase one report during the month of November. So Sir Byron is going to give the phase one this November. And certain aspect of phase one has to do with the electors list, which is one of the items that the CCJ highlighted in their report, and says clearly that even if nothing else is done as it relates to the reform itself, that specific matter, because it was highlighted so many times in the petitions that were filed by the petitioners from the last general election, the Justice Glasgow ruled that there seemed to have been a patent non-compliance of Section 17 of the Electors Regulation Act. And what Section 17, in a nutshell, says is that there has to be a supplementary and a final list, which is what you use for the elections. And Justice Byron is saying there that phase one will deal with the registration of electors. That's what phase one is going to deal with. The justices said in their document that they presented. Let me just quote briefly there for you and the benefit of our listeners, to show you the extent of this particular matter. It says there, just trying to get the exact, yeah. Under Section 81 of the CCJ's report, it says here, quote, at Section 81, electors' lists are central to legitimate and lawful elections, full stop. Electors' lists, the lists that we use for elections, are central to legitimate and lawful elections. That's how they began the section.
Alvin, I have a video that I have to play during this program. We don't play it right now,
Sure.
making reference to it because of that you mentioned right there.
Right.
When we play the video, I want to come back to that sentence.
Certainly. Certainly.
Being
Certainly. So,
legit to see our election.
so, so, listen to what the CCJ says further. The duty to maintain the integrity of list of electors falls to the Electoral Commission. The integrity. One complaint in this matter is that the polling clerks, returning officer, and chief election officers failed to use the revised list and the supplementary register as the register of electors of the poll. And they went on to say that if that complaint, so here's what Justice Glasgow said, which was the judge who dealt with the matter initially when it went to the High Courts. And that was where the judge didn't allow for a hearing. So because there wasn't a decision coming out of that, that was one of the reasons that the Court of Appeal ruled that they cannot decide on something which does not have a decision from the court, because the Court of Appeal would have had to say, okay, the High Court ruled X, Y, or Z. So now we look at the ruling and say the ruling is wrong in law, heard in law, whatever the case might be. But since there was not a decision because the judge threw out the petitions, and then, of course, the petitioners took the matter to the CCJ, which is the Supreme Court. So the CCJ says, we're not looking at this matter from a point of view of whether you have a right to appeal or we have able to adjudicate on the matter, but from the principle of justice. And we'll come back again on the Prime Minister's behavior, because some folks will say, well, under the Constitution, he can call election. That is true. That is very true. He has that prerogative to do that. But in exercising that prerogative, you have to bring with it, as they would say, the spirit of the law, the intent. You don't just willy-nilly because the law says X, Y, Z, you do that. So here's what Justice Glasgow said, and I'll pause for a minute. The first instant judge, Justice Glasgow, made the following remarks about the list issue at section 129 of his submission. Section 17 of the Registrations Act states that the revised annual list and the supplementary register shall constitute, he didn't say may, shall constitute the register of electors for the respective polling districts and shall be used as the register for any election. If the pleading are taken as correct, meaning the pleading from the petitioners, then the use of the preliminary and the supplementary register at the 6th December 2019 election, there was a patent non-compliance with Section 17 of the Registration Act. So the justice himself recognized, he's saying if, based on the pleadings that were presented, there appeared to be a patent non-compliance. And the justices, the CCJs, went on to further point that out. And they also said that if nothing else is done, let's suppose we don't even go into the full ambit of a reform, the fact that this was such a central part of the pleadings and the petitions, that if nothing else, this matter has to be looked into. And in Sir Byron's letter, which I'm sure he communicated to the Prime Minister, he's saying this is what's going to form phase 1 of his report. And he's saying, I will present it during the month of November, the first phase of the report, which will include matters pertaining to the list. And he went on to say further, Parliament tables the Register of Electors legislation in December, which is next month, 2022, with plans to enact it in January of 2023, so that the Register of Electors could be compiled, in accordance with the recommendations during that calendar year. So, Tony, when I read that, against the backdrop of what the Prime Minister did with his address to the nation on Sunday, I came to the conclusion that we have a tyrant. Whether we didn't think of it before, we were saying it and we were not sure, we have a tyrant, we have a dictator. I'm not even going to deal with the fact that he said at his swearing of his ministers that he would give us electoral reform and all of that. Let's assume that that is an issue by itself. But how could you, as a prime minister, you have someone looking at electoral reform? The guy sent you a report. The guy's giving you timelines and telling you what he's going to do, when and what. And you come in November, dissolving the House and saying you're going to have elections in December to use that same old list that we all agree is messed up because Tony, like in the United States, we have IDs. Dominica don't have ID. So the only thing that's going to determine whether you can vote or not is whether your name on the list. That's it. So
Right.
if that list is corrupt, then obviously the results of the election will be corrupt.
Okay. So you put a lot of stuff in there. So I want to take it back. You know, like when you have a movie and you start and then you have to go back and understand the backstory. Because not everybody is Dominican in the audience, and not every Dominican is as up to date and accustomed or acquainted with all the granular details. So essentially, the Liberal Party government came into power in 2000. That's 22 years ago.
Yeah.
First, the Prime Minister, Rosie Douglas.
Yep.
Douglas died in office about a year and a half or so into his run. I don't think he has two.
Nah, he didn't even do a good 2 years, right?
So the Honorable Pierre Charles took over from Rosie. Pierre Charles himself met an untimely demise. He died in office also. So Dominica lost two prime ministers had to die to get Roosevelt Skerritt and as prime minister. Came in as prime minister, very young man, and he's been off to the races since then. So essentially, Roosevelt Skerritt in office and the prime minister of Dominica on about 20 years, right? From if you give 3 years to between Rosie and Pierre Charles, 19, almost 20 years. And in that time, we've had 3 general elections since in 2009, I think, and then 2004,
14 and
2009.
19. Yeah.
From the very outset of that first election in 2009, the observers of that election in their report recommended certain steps that should be taken that would make the election more fair and more free. They did it in 2009, they did it in 2014, they did it in 2019. And not complicated things, simple things like because there's so much migration out of Dominica, and the constitution says that if you have been out of the country for 5 years, you should be taken off the voters list or the electors list as you call it. um, Dead people. Somewhere along the line, the mechanism that the Constitution has in place to make sure that when somebody dies, there's a process where that gets communicated to the authorities and that person is taken off the list so that when you do the new annual list, it will account for folks who have been out for 5 years and more importantly, will account for folks who died in that interim. So that happens every year. On the announcement of an election, people there's a list that happens in that annual list, and then there are records that the Electoral Commission has of who died in between then. It's as if you have a credit card statement. You get a statement every month, but in between you have transactions that take place between the next statement. So if something happens, you can go back and check your last statement, and then you can check transactions that you did in between. So that is where the question of the supplemental list comes. It
Right.
is take into account the changes that will be reflected in the next annual update. But that next annual update doesn't. An election is called before that next annual update, so that
Right.
supplement comes into play. That all of those mechanisms were in place. somehow that mechanism was not implemented and allowed to lapse. And so annual lists would come out without the people who died being taken off the list. And
Right.
people who operated for 10 and 20 years still on the list. And so that resulted in a bloated list. The population of Dominica has been reported around 70,000 for the last 20 years. I'm sure it's less than that now. But even if you concede that there's a population of 70,000 people, the election lead, some elections are back, there was 70,000 people on
That
that.
was the last election, 2019. That was the numbers that were used.
Yeah, there was 72,000 people on the list.
895. I
And
know that number.
bear in mind that you can only register on that list when you're 18 years old. And not everybody who is 18 years old are automatically registered. There's no
Correct.
people have to go to it. So if you imagine, let us say Dominica has a pretty young population, it's skewed to the youth. Well, let us say for sake of argument, 20% of the people in Dominica are less than 18 years old. And you have 70,000 people. That means that you have at least 14,000 people who do
That's
not
correct.
no way you can have a voters that's significantly more than say 50,000 people.
That's right.
Take into account folks who do not bother to register, folks migrated or whatever it is, then you a reasonable size for the voters probably between 40 and 50,000.
Just even say 60.
Even if you say 60, the voters list then has 12,000 more than it should have, which is like 15% more. And
That's right.
in small constituencies where elections are won by 10 votes or 50 votes or 5 votes, imagine if you have an extra top in a constituency, what happens in that regard. And so there were very simple requests. I'm one of those folks that don't like to call it electoral reform. I like to call it enforcement of the existing electoral laws. Reforms are needed in terms of being able to set term limits, being able to prevent the prime minister from calling the election at his whim and fancy, taking care of how you finance campaigns and so. Reform is needed. But that is quite separate from saying that the laws that we already have, we want them implemented and we want them enforced. The simple one of keeping the voters list updated and integrity, that is very, very simple. And Dominicans have been asking for that at least since 2009. 13 years now, we've been asking for something as simple as that. And if you understand that anybody in any village in Castle Bruce or anyone in the village can sit down on a weekend and tell you everybody that died in the village in the last 5, 6 years and look on the list and see that they shouldn't be there. It's not a very difficult exercise that they're asking for. And there are also some antiquated practices like dipping your finger in ink to decide to show that you voted, which is outdated because there's all kind of techniques to get that ink off your finger and then you can go back and vote. Because nobody goes through and check your ID when you go to vote and say, okay, I verify it's you, or none of those records habits happen. And so if the prime minister engaged, he asked for assistance, and there was a grouping from CARICOM, from the Commonwealth Secretariat, from the OECS, and from the OAS. Four well recognized bodies sent representatives to Dominica and looked at the electoral system and made recommendations. The same recommendations pretty much have been made by the observers of the last election. The Prime Minister ignored that and still went ahead and called the election in 2009. Subsequent to that, he engaged Sir Dennis Byron for the tune of at least $500,000, $500,000, to do the same exercise again. And then Sir Byron is now submitting his in the last stages of his report, and the Prime Minister wants to repeat what he did in 2009. Ignore the report of the experts that he hired and go ahead and call another election. And so this is where we are, and that is why, folks, we are so agitated and we are so angry. There is nobody right now in their right senses who say that they love Dominica who is not angry at these shenanigans. Because if we understand what Alvin read, that the justice of the Caribbean Court of Justice says that the electors list is central to the legitimacy of an election. And elections are central to the legitimacy of the thriving of a democracy. So when you circumvent that, when one man can sit there and just circumvent that at will, basically, if we allow that to happen, we are saying that we are willing to live in a country that is not a democratic country. That is the crux of the matter. If we allow the government, Roosevelt Skerrit, twice in a row to ignore recommendations from people that he chose and go ahead and do an election, we are saying, not once, we're saying it twice, that we concede that we are not living in a country that is democratic. We're living in a dictatorship and so on. And so the question is, what are we going to do in response to that state of affairs? And I see my good friend and somebody that I much admire, Mr. Afi Martin, is with us. Afi is no stranger to this weekend interview and TDN and the audience. And so, Afi, I am so grateful and really appreciative of the fact that you are able to make it with us tonight. I know that Wednesday is a walk day where people use their feet to show their dissatisfaction and to register their dissent. And so I know it's a hectic day for you. And so I doubly appreciate you making the effort to come on, my brother. Thank you so much. The question that I have is, and you can talk about anything, but the question that I have is, what should be the response of Dominican to the state of affairs that faces? I don't know if your mic is muted.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
I'm sorry, but I,
I'm hearing
you,
you.
are you hearing me?
Yes, loud
Yes,
and clear.
we are. Yes, we are.
Okay. Um, you caught me in my post-walk siesta. Every Wednesday, there are two things I do. I go to walk and then I come home and I go to sleep. Um, at the ripe young age of 76, I've discovered that I need to sort of invest in that kind of recharge on a more regular basis than I've been used to, and it works. So my apologies. My apologies also for um, I'm I'm using my phone because that's the only device available to me where I am. It's not the best, but I can hear what you're saying. I heard Alvin before, and as long as you can hear me, that'll be fine.
Yeah, well, yeah, you
Um,
very clearly.
okay. Um, I believe the first thing we have to do is make sure we have a very clear understanding of what led us to this point. The reason I say that is that there's a lot of variance of understanding of the process by which we got to this point where democratic process of elections is endangered. Italy. One of the review the history of events that got us to this point is to realize although there's one person who leads an attack like that on democracy, the attack only succeeds because he has a lot of help.
That's right.
From other people in the society. And the mistake that has been made thus far in dealing with this prime minister is that we have assumed, both correctly and wrongly, that he is the cause of all the problems. He is the initiator of the problem. But he has a team of people who work with him to implement his dangerous and destructive actions, as in the case of the destruction of the electoral process. And those people have to be identified, and we have to go after them as well. and we have to démasser them. We have to disrobe them, expose them, shame them, and remove them as well. And it is it's a tragedy, because some of the people who are the enablers of this process of democratic sabotage are otherwise good people. Some are civil servants, public servants. Others are in the private sector. Others even came out of civil society organizations. But something happened to turn those people into very bad people, to turn otherwise honest minds into criminal minds. Let's take the question of the Electoral Commission, for example. The people we've had on the Electoral Commission prior to the current board, of course, all appointed by the state, some of them were lawyers. They knew the law. They knew exactly what needed to be done to implement existing law. Because prior to 2005, which was the first election contested by this prime minister, we had previous prime ministers and previous governments, the United Workers' Party from 1995 to 2000, the Freedom Party for 15 years before that, and the Labour Party for another substantial period before that. And effectively, it is the existing electoral law with some minor adjustments over time that was used to ensure that we had free and fair elections that were non-controversial. Take the matter of the lists. There were diligent electoral officers, chief electoral officers, who ensured that the lists were constantly updated based on the register of deaths, confirmation of people absent for more than the required legal period for residence in order to qualify as a voter, and so on. So this never really, got actual voting. The actual process of voting was preceded by a period of rigorous training, careful selection and rigorous training of the agents, the persons who would actually on the front line conduct the election. And there was not a problem. But the problems came up when this, and I hasten to say that I don't call his name anymore, because I think it invokes a dark power to call his name. So I do not call his name. The person who is occupying the prime ministership right now got a taste of a cherry from 2004 to 2005 when he wasn't elected. That was after the death of Pierre Charles. But by that time, it didn't take long. He allowed that this taste of the cherry to become something of an addiction. Maybe it was there before and we just didn't see it. And he decided that he enjoyed the power. He enjoyed the status. He enjoyed the privilege. He enjoyed the perks of that office so much that he was not going to allow it to slip away from his grasp. And he was going to do everything possible. You will recall that although he had a French passport and dual citizenship, he got an attorney and a judge to hide that passport in law, which was a violation of the electoral laws of the country. So he started very early breaking the electoral laws of the country himself to ensure that he would continue to have access to a chance to stay as prime minister. The whole world knows that. There are lots of lawyers who know that. There are lots of us who know that. There's a lot of people who pressed that this irregularity be turned back, overturned, so that in fact, the restriction on a dual citizen seeking public office in Dominica would once again become fully operative. Unfortunately, you had people like Tony Astafan, a senior counsel, a senior member of the court, ably assisted by several other attorneys, a couple of whom were themselves senior counsels, and they collaborated and colluded to use technicalities in law, not the substance of law, to ensure that although he was a dual citizen of French as well as a Dominican citizen, although he had a passport, a French passport, on which he had traveled, he was allowed, he was enabled seek public office. In other words, the person who to protect us from from the violation of law ended up facilitating the breaking of the law, the undermining of the electoral law, by allowing him to become qualified, as well as Peter Seja from La Plaine, who was also a dual citizen and who was also assisted by the lawyers and by one judge to hide his passport from the court. So let's be clear that this is not an overnight exercise of one individual. This is a criminal enterprise that started off with that and graduated very quickly to the question of manipulating the list. And the manipulation of the list was very easy to do, because they allowed, for example, instead of allowing the electoral officer, the chief electoral officer, to run the affairs of the election, which is what the law states, there was constant political interference. And it started very, if you will, innocently, by influencing the selection of the officers who conducted the election.
Actually, I want to I I want to jump in and say that we have about 10 minutes left. I don't know where the time went to.
Okay, all right. So
But
I'll get straight to your question.
no,
So
no,
your
no.
question is,
Before you
what do
go,
we do about this? What do we do about this? That's why I said you start with the initiator of this, if you will, undermining of our law, and you include all those enablers, the various people who were electoral chairman of the electoral commission and members of the electoral commission. All those people are guilty of sabotaging our fledgling democracy, and they have to be brought to account. They have to be named, they have to be charged, and they have to be brought to account. In addition, the members of the Labour Party who went along with this, some of them innocently and some of them quite knowingly, they too have to be given an opportunity to answer why, if you knew that what you were doing was wrong and against the law, why did you allow it? Why, if you knew that the person who you brought to vote, who you knew had been away from Dominica for more than 20 years, and you brought them, you didn't disclose to the agent, the officer, that this person has been away from so and so and so and so. Although he came to vote, I needed to let you know in all honesty that, and let you make the decision. Why did that not happen? Is because good citizens who knew what was going on remained silent. Now, good citizens happily and no longer remaining silent. What we do about it is this. What we have started to do about it is we have started to call out the perpetrators publicly by name and by office. We have started something called a walk, which is guided by a search for peace, justice, and prosperity in Dominica. And under that, we subsume certain key critical issues like abuse of children, abuse of the environment, and abuse of law. And we are going, and for 33 weeks today, we have drawn attention, public attention to this matter. We have worked hard to find attorneys who would be willing to lead the charge. That's the next step, because we will explore first of all the legal avenues for stopping the problem, for solving the problem. And if the legal avenues fail, sadly, I would have to say that we would have to get more direct, because this violation of our electoral law has allowed for corruption to become the norm in government in Dominica, for square pegs in round holes to become the norm in government in Dominica, for a failure to plan and to make proper policy to become the norm. All the things that have led us to this unfortunate situation. And then there's a critical issue of overseas Dominicans who knowingly break the law every time they allow themselves to be brought here to vote, even if they know they have not been resident for the required legal period. So there's a lot of, it's like you have to get it. It eventually becomes a mass operation, but all the people who have participated in it need to know that they are being targeted. They have been identified. We know many of them, most of them. We know the people who organize the transportation, for example, for voters from the United States to come to Dominica. They arrive the day of the election and they vote and they leave the next day. So we know the people. Some of them are here now. Barbara Daly is back here working as a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The woman who organized the public breaking of the electoral laws of Dominica. So what we do about it? We get people who are brave enough to stand up and call it out. People who are brave enough to stand up eventually and make sure, for example, this calling of this fake election that has just been done, we are going to make sure it doesn't happen. Right. We're going to ensure that that election does not happen.
I have to jump in though. I have to jump in because
you said
time, and I want to give Alvin 2 minutes to say something. What I want to say though is that I'm going to do this every Wednesday at 7 p.m. So we will get to continue the conversation, and if we need
no problem.
Programs in between, I will organize to have programs in between. But I do have 2 guests who are waiting in studio to come in at 8 p.m. So I have a really hard stop at 8 p.m. But Alvin,
I was going to err on the side of you playing the video if it doesn't take that long. You said you had a video. It didn't take that long.
If you, Sam, can you play a video from Roosevelt Scary, please?
You said you had a video.
I didn't hear that.
I'm to play it. Sam, are you on?
Well, if that was a question, I did not hear what the question was, or if it a comment, I did not hear.
Tony says he had 2 videos he want to play side by side.
Alvin, go ahead and give some closing remarks quickly because I have to stop.
Okay. All right. Well, no, I mean, as I will say, as it relates to the lists, as I indicated, it is the electoral list is the hallmark for conducting any elections. Okay. And one of the comments that the CCJ said that this matter is of most serious concern that ought to be investigated irrespective of the outcome of this appeal, of this petition. So basically they're saying, no matter what happens, this is a matter that has to be looked into. From all indication, they're going to use that list at the end of November, which will be the final list for purposes of the election. There is absolutely no indication that that list has been cleaned or cleansed or dealt with or looked into the manner for conducting the elections. And as such, I think that elections will be illegitimate, it will be illegal, it will be unlawful. And like Afi said, we have to do all that is necessary, as they would say, as Malcolm X would have said, by any means necessary. We got to stop that election.
No, so I agree with that completely. And the video that I was going to play is the Prime Minister in anticipation of that response. He's saying that the government will not allow such action of protest. His words are that You fight elections with programs, and with law. All of those things that he refused to do, and therefore they will respond very strongly to any protests of blocking roads or anything like that. I wanted to but Alvin and Afi, I want to say thank you very much for coming. I plan to do this every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Afi, I know you say that's your Wednesday and that's the time. Maybe I get a recording from you ahead of time that I can play so I don't interrupt your sleep so much.
Okay, that's
And
fine.
it will handle a lot of those things. But I think that what we have is a situation where we cannot just watch it go by anymore. We have to put a hard stop, and we have to be prepared. So any what that he brings, there's more of us than there is of them. And we have to take that position. And knowing that we are on the right side, we would also have that fortitude. Gentlemen,
Mhm.
I 8 o'clock, so both of you give very good contribution. Afi, yours was stellar because you took us back and you broke it down so that the folks who are not Dominicans can understand what it is we're dealing with. So thank you for that so much. Alvin, you as well as usual. You brought in that this has gone to the highest level. It has gone up to the Caribbean Court of Justice. And Roosevelt Scary thinks that he can just rip it up back and toss it back into the face of
And you
Dominicans.
think he's a doctor.
And exactly. And so when we come back next week, folks, at 7 p.m., we will talk about, there'll be more action that will have been taken in the meantime. And we will talk about that. In the meantime, folks, look out for notifications from us because there is a movement on the ground and we will need your support. Those of us in the diaspora who have the luxury of distance, we want to contribute. You will get a notification that will ask you to $10, $20. Very simple from our point, but will make significant difference on the ground in Dominica. So look out for that. We're making the appeal, and Dominica needs you. We'll ask for $10. We'll ask for $20. You can put 100. Put 100. Because it is needed, and the folks who are going to be putting their bodies on the line will need water. They will need food. They will need possibly legal representation, and so we have to step up and do our
In 1979, we had the farmers feeding us. We don't
exactly.
have agriculture now, so farmers are not there to feed us.
So we have to support our folks. Again, gentlemen, you have 12 euros to
Thank
spend
you.
the hour with me. I appreciate it, and I will be calling on you guys and other associates for next week at 7 p.m.
All
Afi,
right.
you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks to our listeners and our viewers. Afi, take care.
Sam, if you can play the second video, it's
Good night,
just also
gentlemen.
yeah. Good night, sir.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. I guess none of the videos are loading, so I just leave this one and go across to the other one.